Alright, I'm going to show you how to do a do-it-yourself release hand check and performance evaluation on a classic tech binding. A classic tech binding means it's a tech binding that has fittings in the boot that go on these two pins, and of course the fittings in the boot toe that go on these two pins. Bindings such as the marker kingpin, for example, are more like a hybrid tech binding, and that's not what we're talking about here, although these principles can apply somewhat. In any case, first thing to do is you want to get your binding all adjusted to your preferred release value, and the heel gap is super important. So in this case, this is the ion. We'll get it in there. Should be able to snap it down in if you've got it on any kind of normal setting. And then the check for lateral release is super simple. You're just going to rotate the heel piece with your hand. I stabilize the ski a little bit with my one hand and then rotate it. And you should be able to see a nice kind of return to center action. This is really, really essential for good binding performance. As you can see, we really get some nice performance with this combination of a Dynafit boot with the Dynafit fittings that are perfectly made and an ion binding with nice strong toe springs and well-formed pins. And then if you just keep rotating the heel piece, you want to go to the point where the boot comes out, and it should feel really smooth and just pop right out. If it knocks things off your workbench tool rack, so much the better. Anyway, I'll just do that again real quick. So the boot goes in, bam. It helps when you're putting the boot in the heel to put it in alpine mode so that when you're jerking down on the cuff, it's a little easier to snap it down in. Without a brake, you can do this on a workbench, or even with a brake, really, without the blocks holding the ski up, but I thought it was a little better with the brake being able to operate normally here. Let's see here. Okay, so again, I'm just using my hand. First, you want to see if this has a nice snapping back, kind of return to center effect, which is surprisingly good on a properly operating tech binding. It's nearly as much elasticity as some alpine bindings, or maybe as much, or even better perhaps. And then if you keep it going, it should just come out without sticking or anything. All right, let's look at how the toe should look while it's doing this. All right, now you can see the boot toe fitting riding on the binding toe pin. It's a ball and socket arrangement basically, although the pin on the binding is not really a ball, it's kind of tapered on the end, but it operates the same way. As you can see, you get that effect, and then when it releases, it's going to come out like that. Now if you put your boot in there and you do this test and it sticks and has a huge amount of resistance to the lateral release, or it comes out way too easily, you may have a problem. This is a very easy check to do. A ski shop should always do it. It's real quick, can be done out on the counter where the cash register is even. And then it's super easy to do at home on your kitchen counter or anywhere else like that. Next, I'll show you how to self-check on the bench the vertical release, which is tougher. Now I'll show you how I do a vertical release function test. This has no function in terms of measuring the release force. It's just a way to see if the binding actually works the way it's supposed to. They usually do. I don't do this test a lot, but I thought it'd be fun to show you how you can check a binding and see if it does release vertically upwards at the heel. When there's a break on the binding, there's no room to put a pry bar under there, so I put a spacer under here, and I set the binding, down on 7 or 6 or something. If you have it set really high, when you have to put the lever here, it takes way too much force. And then I just put the lever in and lever the boot up out of the binding. Pretty basic. One thing this shows you, it's good to know, good to illustrate, is that tech bindings with the classic heel do not have much vertical elasticity. In other words, the boot heel, when you need a release, only moves up a few millimeters and then it pops out pretty violently. The problem with that is when you're skiing aggressively, you don't have any real shock absorption vertically in a tech binding heel. You have a little bit. I can show you we can lever it up and you see the actual binding heel kind of moves up and down, and then the boot pulls up and out of the pins, and the pins spread apart as they ride up on the heel fitting. But it's just a very minimal amount of movement you get out of it. And a binding such as a kingpin has a lot more vertical elasticity. Dynafit Beast, those can be an excellent solution if you're a real aggressive skier and you need that kind of energy absorption rather than just that kind of locked in feeling that requires a higher release value to hold you in the binding than a binding that would have some more shock absorption. This test is a lot easier when you do not have a ski brake getting in the way of the pry bar. So I'll show you it on an Ion LT binding. All right, here we go with a G3 Ion LT. Doesn't have a brake, so there's a lot more room to work in here, and I can more easily show you the way I test the vertical release with a pry bar in my home shop. Basically just put the pry bar in like that. I use a flat bar because it rocks sideways and gives you a nice release effect rather than trying to do this kind of thing. So I'm going to put it on the other side so you can see things easier, and then pull it up out. And while you do this, if you want to educate yourself, you can watch how the pins spread apart and thus allow the binding to release, which I'll focus in on that a little bit. The whole binding moves up and down. That even actually provides some of the elasticity, not really very much, but you can see that action. And then the boot pops out as these two pins spread apart and ride up through these inclined planes on the heel fitting. So there you are. That's two ways to test and evaluate your tech bindings in your home shop. Just remember, this is not a way to measure the release force. It's just to make sure the bindings actually function, which is job one. After you know they function, you can set your release settings to your values you're used to or the chart values. And also a reminder, just remember these numbers on the binding, they correspond somewhat to between different brands and different bindings, but there's a certain amount of inaccuracy in those numbers, even the ones that are tested and certified. So bear that in mind and know that you really need to be careful about setting your bindings correctly if you want to safeguard your legs and knees and so forth from injury and all that. So there you go.